counteroffensive, destroyed Leopards, the joyful cries of Russian propaganda. I think it's time to talk about this and explain a few things. I'm Maria Druzka, and let's start with the main point. There is no counteroffensive. Russians are simply smoking in non-designated places again, shelling their own ammunition depots, destroying their own locations, and then retreating from their own positions for our soldiers to come in. And yes, this is sarcasm mixed with a certain degree of cynicism and pain, because some things are better left unsaid and wait for official statements from the military political leadership of Ukraine. But why did I start so? Everything is very simple. First of all, this war is mediatically illuminated, and every owner of a smartphone or action camera can immediately become a witness of the event, a blogger or even a journalist creating their own content. And let's be honest, in search of sensation and cheap hype, people often harm the defense forces of Ukraine. Secondly, people are used to consuming only pleasant information for themselves, which suggests that our enemy are crazed idiots and any liberating operations go very quickly and without special difficulties. But this is not so. I'm sure as people interested in the Russian-Ukrainian war have already watched a bunch of different videos in which someone tells something about possible strikes of Ukrainian forces, the state of affairs on the front, forecasts for the development of events, and so on and so forth. Often these videos are accompanied by a map from the deep state or something like that. But you know what? All these guesses, they do not correspond to reality, because in our country there is a very limited number of people who have all the information about the course of events at the front lines, have access to the plans of the counteroffensive, and know information about state of the armed forces. And these people, they definitely will not go public and talk about some specific details, just as President Zelensky will not come out and say, hey, here the counteroffensive begin. You know, I must warn you that I will not speculate on the topic of the counteroffensive and give out some insiders or hype on the war, because behind each of our victories is the blood of our own military and civilian citizens. But if you still like what I do and my videos, you can always subscribe to my channel and like these videos. Thank you. Now let's touch on Russian propaganda, especially the part related to the counteroffensive and Western technology. You have to understand that Russian propaganda, it is not some homogeneous structure. There are official media that work according to some methods that come from above. There are so-called military correspondents, apologists for the Ministry of Defense of Russian Federation, who work directly on the ground. There is a whole pool of Telegram channels, of Twitter pages, of various orientations, which one way or another speculate on the war. There are various experts who may not understand anything in military affairs, but they want to hype, so they sell the audience insiders, in which there is not a word of truth. And this is just a small part of those who are trying in one way or another to get something for themselves in this war. What happened to Russian propaganda? Here you have to understand that the Russians were waiting for our counteroffensive not less than we were. They reacted very sharply to the delivery of Western weapons, to the slow takeover of Bakhmut by Russian troops and the Wagner PMC, to missile strikes, made forecasts, and most importantly, they were afraid of our counteroffensive. That's right. I'm not mistaken, they were afraid. They were afraid that there would be another regrouping to prepared positions, or they would be ordered to back off, or something else. What will the propaganda have left to say then? How to justify the actions of Russian forces? And so when our troops began the first attempts to advance in certain directions, suffered losses in equipment and personnel, Russian propaganda became extremely agitated and rushed to attack on the informational front, trying to charge their viewers with the idea that here is it, the power of Russian weapons. We told everyone that we are strong. And while Russian propagandists were feeding their fellow citizens with lies, official information had already emerged that the Ukrainian defense forces had liberated several settlements and that had been previously occupied. Great, right? Now, let me tell you this. There is no war without losses. These are the most painful human losses when military and civilians die. These are economic losses because I think it's no secret that Ukraine is currently filling its budget more than half thanks to Western partners, and equipment is also lost in the war. And the loss of a Leopard is not very pleasant, but of course it's possible. Also, when a tank is damaged, there are two options. The tank can be repaired or the tank cannot be repaired. That's it. If the machine is damaged, if they are critical, this damages the machine is considered lost. If the tank can be repaired, it's pulled back and repaired, then returning machine to service. Soviet tanks during World War II, before they were finally destroyed, could go through 2-3 repairs of varying capacities. The Germans also pull the equipment back and return it back to service. It's also worth remembering how many times Russian troops destroyed all the HIMARS that we received from Western partners, I think even more than we received. In case of the Leopards, the Russians believe that it is enough just to record from the different angle and you can issue news about the destruction of new Leopards and new operations. And yes, Russian propaganda is very stupid because it's aimed at unpretentious users, but I must admit that the Russian special services know how to prepare and implement IPSO directed at Ukrainians vulnerable to negative information. But the way I'm preparing separate video about IPSO, so please be patient and check my channel. Now, the effectiveness on Russian IPSO is not as good as the beginning of the full-scale invasion, but it's also harmful to people who support this war, to Ukrainians and to foreign audience. I'm Maria Druzka, keep patience and consume information only from verified sources. Слава Україні!